right. Hello, everyone. If you are very hungry, this is a good session to be because you don't really fall asleep because you're hungry. So it's a good time. So today's session is all about Microsoft Fabric notebooks. This is a session title suggested by CoPilot, so that's why it looks nice and flashy. But basically, it's about Microsoft Fabric notebooks. So first things first, a bit about me. I am Pratyusha Kamasani. I work as a solution architect at Avanade UKI. I'm one of the Microsoft MVP, and I organize a London Microsoft Fabric user group in London. I don't know how many of you were there yesterday. We organized one last night as well. There was an AMA. It was good. So basically, I am somebody who started my career as a MSBI developer. And during the cloud first era, and if you are an MSBI developer, you basically had two choices. You either go into the Azure direction, or you either go into the analysis services, Power Pivot, Power View, and eventually Power BI. So I was somebody who chose the Power BI path. And I was so immersed in the Power BI, and I heard somebody talking about oh, we're going to run this Python in the notebook, and I was thinking how can you run Python in the notebook? Because in my head, I was thinking a physical notebook. And that's basically how immersed I was in the Power BI world. And it's also Power BI was perfect tool for me because I could do the end-to-end analysis. I love a bit of user experience and all those things. So it was a tool I loved. But what was good is Microsoft, all the efforts I kept in the Power BI didn't go into waste because Microsoft released Microsoft Fabric, and it's basically an evolution of Power BI. Yes, we got way more items, but still, if you're familiar with Power BI, it's not massively new from the user interface point of view. So that is when I was okay, because we have the Microsoft Power BI, very familiar with, and that's why I kind of jumped into the Fabric world pretty quickly as well. So the session that's what inspired me to be somebody who don't know anything about notebooks, to become somebody who is actually using notebooks within the Fabric. So that's kind of what inspired this session. So today what we're going to talk about is basically we're going to start with role of Power BI dev, what we have been doing as a Power BI developer, and then a bit of introduction to notebooks, and obviously the things around notebooks like Apache Spark, Python, PySpark, GenAI. There is no session nowadays without AI in it. And then I'm going to talk about my new favorite thing called Semantic Link. So let's start with the role of Power BI developer. So as a Power BI developer, what we have been doing so far. So yes, there is a misconception, whenever we say Power BI developer, there's many people think oh, you create pretty reports. It's not only, we don't create just pretty reports, we do many things. So most of the times we start with getting data. We extract the data from the various data sources. It could be structured data sources, semi-structured data sources. Sometimes the data is sitting in a very nice data warehouse in SQL, and sometimes it could be data which is sitting in SharePoint or a blob storage and things like that. But we basically used M language. We used the connections that's available there, and we either used Power Query or we used data flows, and we brought that data into Power BI desktop or into the service or something like that. And then we transformed that data. Again, we used M language to do the most of those transformation. We might be using just the user interface, very high visual way, but we have been basically behind the screens, we have been using the M language. And then what we did is we created semantic models on the top. Basically, we created data sets in the olden days. In the new world, it's semantic models. So we created calculated columns, we created relationships, we created measures by using again, most of the times Power BI desktop and nowadays in the service as well. And then we share the data as visualization, sometimes by using as a pixel perfect reports, or sometimes just as a consumption for the many end users, just so that they could just analyze it. And then on top of that, there are various other things that we did as well. Sometimes we had to do data profiling. We had to check the data quality of, what kind of data that we are working with. Sometimes we have to administer our Power BI tenant, we have to worry about how our workspaces are, how many things are there in workspaces, who has access to our workspaces. And then, source control, we can't just work as a single person. Sometimes we have to work with multiple people. Like if one person goes and make the change. Yes, now we have Power BI project types and so many other things. But like, in the beginning, we didn't have that. What we did is we saved the Power BI file as a V1, V2, V3 in the SharePoint, in the expectation, like, somebody deletes it, we could recover it back from the SharePoint. That was our source control for many years. And the other boring subject, which is a document. We had to document all those things. Like, imagine documenting Power Query, how difficult it is. You have to go right-click, go to description, add the description. And you could go to the code view and do it as well. But anyway, it was not the most amazing thing. But by using notebooks, there are so many things that you could use notebooks. You don't have to use notebooks. Power BI is there. You could still carry on exactly what we are doing. Nothing is replacing Power BI. But what we are talking about is how you could use notebooks to increase our productivity. So some of those pain points that we've been having with the Power BI development, it is something that's already there now. If you already have Fabric, if you already have Premium in the Power BI service, that means you already have Fabric. So how could we use that functionality that's been given to us for our day-to-day development? So that's what it is going to be. So what are these notebooks? Not physical notebooks like I thought in the beginning. So these notebooks is like, in a very simple terminology, if I have to explain it, what it is basically it's a user interface. A user interface where you could go and execute code. You could execute code, you could see the visuals, you could interact with the code. You could also not only just write code in one language, there are multiple languages that you could use. And it's also not only do one type of things in this web interface, you could do multiple things. Like it's not only to do the data transformation, you could do machine learning, you could do data science, you could do CoPilot, you could do OpenAI. So there are so many things that you could do in this one. But as a definition-wise, and also you could use multiple languages, like you could use PySpark, Scala, Spark SQL, and Spark R, and various things. But it can be used for like various things, as I mentioned, ingestion, preparation, and the data transformation and things like that. But if you're looking at it's more like as a definition-wise, what is a notebook? Is like it's an interface that's been basically running Apache Spark jobs behind the screens. We'll get into that in a bit. But let's have a quick look about how these notebooks actually looks in the Fabric environment. So I'm just going to duplicate my screen and go to Fabric. So we all, like me, I'm guessing most of these people here also come from the Power BI world. Is anyone who don't come from Power BI world? Okay, that's easy. So we are going to just look at it from the Power BI perspective. So what I did is I went to powerbi.com. And this is where, if you enable Fabric on your tenant, you have various experiences. So in this case, I am very Power BI focused, so I'm just going to stay in the Power BI. The rest of the things, like if I go home, all the rest of the things are exactly same. So I'm going to one of the workspaces that's already been created, which is called Notebooks in Fabric. And once I go here, I have this new. Because I'm in the Power BI user experience, I could only see things around Power BI. But if I go and click on more options, I could go and see all the items that are available in Microsoft Fabric. So as you could see, this is where I have the notebook. So I could go and click the notebook. And based upon the internet, I was talking to somebody at Microsoft. If something is not working, it's not the problem with Fabric, it's the problem with internet. So that's basically what he told me to say. So this is the notebook. This is the user interface of the notebook. Over here, you have Explorer thing. So let me get a rectangle. So this is your Explorer. This is where you could go and connect your lakehouses, or if you have any resources and things like that. Lakehouse is basically where we store our data and things like that. On the top, you have a ribbon, which is quite self-explanatory. I don't think I need to really go and explain everything there. If you've been in the Power BI world, we have a lot of buttons, and buttons has a tooltips, and you could do things like that. How Notebook works is it works like a cell by cell. So here we have one cell, and then you could go and add various cells. With each cell, it could be either code or it could be a markdown. So for example, if I do a markdown here, and I type H1, and I could change this to heading 1. And if I do another one, and I do H2, I could change this to H2. So if I go to my view, and I do the table of contents, and this is nicely, gives me a nice, table of contents. We'll show another example a bit later as well. See, other things that are quite interesting over here is keyboard shortcuts. I like keyboard shortcuts, so that is probably something interesting. And then we have variables available as well. So during the development of Notebook, you could go and see the variables. We'll come to that in a bit. The next important thing is probably how to execute your code. So I'm just going to remove these markdowns for now. So what you have is each cell has this little play button kind of thingy. So you could go and run individual cell, or you could go, when you go and click on that little arrow next to it, it says options like you could run all above this cell, or you could run all this cell and all the below, which are quite useful. I will talk about that a bit later as well. And you could also have the similar options over here as well. Like it doesn't have the run this cell option here, you have run all. But you could go and see there are various options, and if something is actually running, you could go and cancel. And there is also if there is a Spark session already started, this thing gets enabled, and you could go and click on the stop session to stop the Spark session. We will come back to that in a bit as well. And the other important things, you have environment here. So you could go and create an environment, and what the environment is, you could go and import some of the resources and the libraries that's needed for the notebook. It probably makes no sense now, but it will in a bit. And you could choose various languages over here, or each cell has this option called choosing the language. So for example, when I go and choose Spark SQL here, as you could see, it automatically added this percentage SQL. This is called a magic command in over here. And it's basically, that means in that cell is going to be executed as a Spark SQL until you keep another magic command in the same block. We could also open it in the VS Code. I'll show that in a sec. And then one other thing which is important is the settings. So this is where you also have the name and description. You could do the endorsement, just like how we were able to do in the Power BI. You could do the endorsement here. And also you could schedule your notebook over here. This is very similar to our Power BI data refresh way, how you could schedule. However, you could also schedule by using the, I don't know why I'm clicking the right button. You could also schedule a notebook by using the data pipelines as well. You could orchestrate by using that one. And I think that's basically most of the things that you kind of need to know at this point. One other thing is the autosave. You could turn on and off autosave. So that's a very a quick introduction to the notebooks, just to get the user interface view of it. So what the one of the things that everyone everyone says is if you see the very first line, and this is something I've actually seen it on many docs places, is what they say is notebook is something which is very popular with it's a functionality that's been used by data engineers or data scientists. And why that's been the case is because I personally think notebooks should be something which is used by data professionals. And I think why traditionally it's been used by data scientists and the data engineers is because notebooks was something which was only available in a PaaS world. And in the PaaS world, you have to have a control over, if you take Azure as an example, you need an Azure resource group, you need a way to spin up a cluster, you need to maintain all those things, you need the right access, you need you need to know what the capacity that you need, and there is so much setup options and all those things. But when it comes to the SaaS world with the Microsoft Fabric world, it's actually, you don't need to do any setup. You just have to click a few buttons. You don't have to worry about all the rest of the things that gets done in the background. So it's a zero setup cost and a zero effort to begin with. So that's why I think it's no longer data engineers, data scientists kind of tool. It is like every data professional can use notebooks if they're on the Fabric. At least that's what I know. And also why notebooks now is also like, it is, so when we are in the Power BI world, we all face these problems. It's like whenever we are working with large data sets, especially when you're working in the data flows, I have team members here who have amazing stories with the data flows. And like I personally also worked with the data flows and Power Query, especially when it comes to the large data set. It gets really painful. Very painful, and you have multiple people in the team, it gets extremely painful. Those kind of situations can be resolved by using the notebooks very nicely. And it's like, I know we come from, like, we already learned M language, we already learned DAX, we already, we already learned SQL, and now do we have to learn Python? It does feel like a bit overwhelming, like how many more? But with the Gen AI and with the world is changing so rapidly, and there are more tools available which could help us to get familiarized with these new languages very easily. So that's why I think this is the time to look into the notebooks. So whenever we talk about notebooks, is like one thing which we need to understand is Apache Spark. I'm not going to make this a session about Apache Spark. Is for two reasons. One is it's too big, and the second reason is I'm not a professional. Like I don't want to pretend that I know it all. I'm just going to share what I know, and we're all going to learn together. But just to begin with, what it is first of all, it's open source, and it uses a distributed processing system. What does it mean? It's like so how it works as a distributed processing system is like just like as a visualization way. As I said, I love visuals and I love slides. If you haven't noticed by now, it's like you start with this big data set, you provide the big data set. In Power BI, we probably handle that whole data set as one node. But when you put it into the Apache Spark, it distributes into multiple partitions. And that is where you get this massive performance and all those things. And all this distributed data gets computed by using the different node. So that distributed processing and the distributed node is what gives us that performance. It does use this disk it does use storage. It does keep the data in the store, but all the processing it does happen in memory. So that's why it is really powerful, and it does help with the speed, the performance. We do get this amazing performance when we, especially comparing with our M language and the Power BI world way. So if you are looking at it in a very simple language, if you think about it, Apache Spark is something like a speed delivery, where you ask for a delivery and it's there, it's like Amazon on the day delivery kind of service. And if you're thinking about the distributed service, and this is how it works is think about we need to go and clean up Hyde Park. If you go as one person, it's going to take forever. But you go as a team and you subtask it as to various people, then the cleanup gets quicker. So that's basically this is me. This is how I analyze the concept of how it's going to work. And that's basically the Apache Spark. I did look at it, what is that I was looking what would be the best way to explain Apache Spark. And this is the mind map that came up. And there are so many elements. There are so many things that you could do with it. There are so many languages, so many modules, various things. But we don't have to know it all to begin to start with it. There are a few things I think it's helpful to understand. There are various modules. So we have Spark Streaming, which helps us to do the streaming data. There is mlib, where is the machine learning things. There is GraphX, which is for the plotting and things like that. And then there is Spark SQL. And it supports various languages. So these are the various languages that it supports. But some of those languages we are either familiar with as a Power BI developer, we may have heard them, or we may even know them. To be honest, if I look at all those languages, the only language I know is SQL. That's my strongest point. I tried R. Oh my God, it was like an ocean. I felt like it's okay. I'll just stick with MySQL. And but I heard them. I know what they do. You come across them, and that's the thing. And the two other concepts which are two other concepts which are important to know is the data frames and the libraries. So the data frames in the Python is like, it's nothing but a table. Like we are all familiar with a table. It has rows, columns, it has a structure, and you could keep data in it. Just like we have the table in Power Query, how it has rows, you could point out like, I want this column and this row in Power Query. You could do the same thing in the Python as well. And then we have the libraries. Libraries is like I'm done a lot of data visualization. I love data visualization. One statement I always used to do as a data visualization is steal like an artist. And the libraries are the good example for that. It is a library, it's a code modules that was created by so many community members because it's an open source code. And you could go, and most of the functions and the tasks and the types and various things are already pre-built. Somebody created all these things. What you could do is you could just go and download that library, import that library into your notebook, and you could start using it. So that's basically the libraries are. So if you look at the big mind map, to begin with the notebooks, you don't have to know it all. This gives us a very good, nice starting point for us to start using it. So at that point, I'm going to stop the slides, and we're just going to look into the demos. So if I go back to the same workspace, by the way, you could go and edit notebook names here as well. It was not that easy to find that you could do that in the beginning, but now you could. So what we're going to start with is a very basic Python example. Oh, sorry. Thank you. That's what you were signing. Sorry. So what I was showing before is you could go and edit name just by clicking over here as well. It is not that easy in the beginning to figure it out. So we're going to start with a very basic thing, which is a Python, obviously, before we jump into the PySpark. So like any language, it's kind of mandatory to be able to use the hello world. So that's what I used, hello world. But I went and one extra step, and I actually entered multiple lines. So, but what it is also explains, is like a Python statement ends with a new line character. It's like if you're looking at the Power Query, we add a comma at the end of it. So here, it's just a new line. And the indentation is what we use here to group the code. And basically, so it is something important. Like if you compare to any other language, it's a bit different for me, at least when I found. And the next important thing is comments. I personally like hash as a comment, but you could add multiple lines by using the single quotes, double quotes, and things like that. Executing the current code block is depending upon what you use. I love using my Mac. So it's a command enter, but depending upon what you use, it's the things. And the next important thing is identifier in Python. So again, if you go back to our Power Query, so this is our Power Query code that we have here, right? So in the Power Query, what we have is we have a variable, and we have an expression assigned to that variable. In that expression, we did various operations in the Power Query. In the same way, in the Python as well, you have a variable, and you could assign things to it, like as an expression. You could also do various operations in it, very similar to Power Query when we compare it. The thing which is important is like when it comes to the Power Query, we could use any names. But here, for the identifiers, we have rules. So we could we could use underscore, we could start with an underscore, and we have to use only A to Z, so these are the various constraints that when you're creating the identifiers in the Python. It is pretty easy to get used to very quickly. So if you look at it, so this bit is wrong over here, but the rest of the things are okay. And it's also you could also create different data types. So as you could see, I have an integer, I have string, I have something which is wrong, but I also have a list type, which is, again, very similar to what we have seen in the Power Query so far. And we could do the conditional statements, just like what we could do in the M language. Keep saying Power Query as a language, but it's not. M is the language. So again, the conditional statements are very similar to our M language, except the indentation is where we are doing the grouping, not like how we open up the brackets and all those things that we do in the Power Query. All the rest of the things are very similar. And we could also create functions. So like we do in the M, we could create a function, and we could use that function anywhere else in the entire PBIX or in our data flow way. So here also you could create a function, and you could use that anywhere else in your notebook as well. So you could do those things. So those are the basic things, which is kind of comes from the Python. The next thing, obviously, what we want to do is the data analysis. So when it comes to the data analysis, what we have is this is where the library comes in. So one of the library, which is very famous for the data analysis, is the pandas. So this is another amazing thing about open source thing, is like because they don't have the big boss to say, or I don't know, not the big boss or like a marketing people to say, this has to be called this way. And after 6 months, we're going to change into something else. You could name it whatever you want, so why not pandas? And there is this another one, it's called Beautiful Soup. So it basically helps you to scrape a web page, and it was like, it's my code, I'll name it whatever I want. So it's quite fun when you're coming across these libraries in the very beginning. It's just like, really cool names. But anyway, so pandas is one of the library which you could use for the data analysis. So in this case, what I have here is I have a list with the data, and then I created columns. So so this list is where I have my data. And when I created another variable saying column, and I gave 3 column names. And at this stage, what I'm doing is I created a data frame. And I'm using basically df_data frame and things like that. So the good thing is we also have IntelliSense here. So like, when you start typing, you do get like a nice IntelliSense and explaining like all the things that's available there, which is, I think it is quite nice when you start doing it. And also like when you start typing, it explains you with a nice, what kind of information that you could keep in there and stuff. The one other thing which is quite nice, I like, is, for example, anywhere, for example, I imported pandas. So I could just go there, I could scroll down, and I could understand what's happening in that, more information about that library. I could just go and understand more about it. At any point as well, I could just go and hover over on things to understand what type of object that I am dealing with in this case. So, and there is this command called pip freeze. So you could go and you could see what are the various libraries that's already installed. Again, this is a beauty of using it in the SaaS platform, because there are so many libraries already installed, and you could also still go and get more libraries as well. So let me just hide output. Yeah, and like you could clear output, you could hide output, you could auto resize and stuff like that as well. So that is basically the data frame. And what we have here is, as I mentioned previously, data frame has a structure, and I could just go and execute it. And this is the data frame I just created. And this data frame I created, I used Python to do it. And this is where let's talk about PySpark. So why PySpark is, as I mentioned previously, PySpark enables you to do the distributed processing. When you're using the data frame from Python, just by using the pandas, it doesn't enable the distributed processing. It's a single node. So you're not getting that performance that we are all talking about. You get that performance only when you start using the PySpark. So what is PySpark? So what other things that you could do? Like, you could even go and embed a whole web page and things like that in your notebook as well. So I'm doing the exactly same thing that I've done previously. Like if you're looking at the code, it looks exactly same, except at this stage, what I'm doing here is in the previous step, I used PD because I was referring it to pandas data frame. In this case, what I'm doing is I am starting a Spark session. I'm starting a Spark session with the Spark command, and I am creating a data frame by using the Spark. So now it is using the distributed processing. And what I can also do is so when I execute this block, let me just execute that. The internet is being a bit, honestly, flaky. Honestly, it's not Fabric, not that somebody said it. So when I start executing this, as you could see, I could see the Spark jobs that's been created in the background. And I could also, if you are interested, if you want to go and understand what's happening behind the screens and all those things, I could go and click this kind of a Spark Web UI. And what it does is it opens up this entire Spark Web UI, and I could understand, I could go to the nitty-gritty of what's happening. To be honest, I know this exists. I don't understand every single thing. So I'm kind of telling myself I don't need to understand at this point of view, at this point of time. But you can go and do that. And you could go and view your data. You could view data as a chart, and you could do various things like that as well. So let me hide this output, and let's carry on doing it. So we learned about pandas data frame. We just looked at the Spark data frame. But recently, pandas also released another library called PySpark pandas. So if you create your data frame by using PySpark pandas, it does use distributed processing. It is very new, I think, and only when you use that particular library, then you have the distributed processing. So they all look pretty much exactly same, from the little data's point of view. When I look at it, they all are looking pretty same. But you have functionalities where you could go and see what kind of data frame I'm working with, or you could just go and hover over it. But this is a quick a view to understand the differences between them. If you're working with small data set, pandas data frame is pretty good. But if you're working with a large data set, go for PySpark data frame. But if you wanted to do a lot of transformations, if you wanted to do work with various transformations, not all type of data manipulation is available in PySpark data frame. That is when you probably use pandas PySpark data frame. So this gives you a quick understanding of it. It is just to understand, why I'm focusing on this is, you suddenly import the data and you're not getting the performance, and this explains you why that's happening. So just think about where your data is happening. And once you have your data frame there, you could do all sorts of manipulations and things. You could go and you could filter your data, saying okay, I want to just view certain rows, and you could do various things like that. You could go and understand what kind of schema I'm working with. You could go and do what kind of data types I have. I could go and describe, and various things that you could do. So all these notebooks I am going to share, you will be able to get it. So anything that you see here, you have access later. So all these things, so far what we did is we created data frames. So, and you could probably think about this point of the time as just oh my God, this is too much code. That is not that we are familiar with, especially when we are coming from the Power Query side of it. So that is where we have data wrangler. So if you go to this data view, and there is this option called transform data in data wrangler. When you click on that, what we get is, okay, let me actually execute this bit to explain this bit. So. Is it still run? No, it's created. Let me just create this one. So it creates 3 of my data frames. And now I go to my data wrangler. And what I have here is all the data frames that I created will automatically appear there. Either it's a pandas data frame or PySpark data frame. The one thing which is not supported yet is if pandas PySpark data frame is not supported with the data wrangler yet. But all the other two are supported. So once I go here, I could go and do, this is probably our low-code, high UI low-code experience. You could go, you could do various transformations that we could do previously. So for example, let me just say capitalize first character, and I could go and choose the column that I wanted to. I could go and click on that, and then it says apply. It creates the code for me. You have the cleaning steps just like over there. And I could just copy this code to the clipboard, or I could say add code to notebook, and it adds the entire code to my notebook. And I could, so as you could see, it also added a comment saying this is the code created by Data Wrangler, and I could execute that one. So this is kind of a low-code experience that we have in here. All the rest of the things are pretty much same. So now let's go to one step further in. And actually, now we are working with some simple, small sample data. But what if you want to work with the data that's already available in your lakehouse? So let me just add a quick code block here to show how it works. In this case, I have some data already available in my lakehouse. I want to read that one. I could just drag and drop, and it creates the code for me. And if I execute that code, which is basically same in here, and I could I could just click display, and it basically displays the same thing here. I could see there are no proper columns here, so I could go and add column names, and I could display that one as well. So if I show this one now, what I did here, I added column names, I created a data frame, and instead of selecting all the columns, I'm interested in only few columns. So these are the 3 columns I'm interested in, and I'm displaying that code, and there you go, I have only that data frame. So now I'm working with the data which is already in my one lake, which probably is most of the times we will be doing. Once I have that, I could start data profiling just over here, as we saw previously, or I could even go and get more libraries and start do the data profiling. So if I just go back to if I open one more workspace, I have another example in a different workspace. So if I quickly go to my workspaces and I go to, so this is another example. I couldn't run the library this morning, so that's why I'm showing here. Come on. So what it's going to show is I have a data frame already defined, and I am using a library called data profiling, and literally 4 lines of code or 5 lines of code, including the display. It creates the entire data profiling report for me. It tells me what is the overview of my data, variables, correlations, missing values in my data. I could show it as a matrix or something. I could get a sample data of my things. So just with 5 lines of code, I could do the entire data profiling of my data. So that's how powerful it could be once you start using them in here. So the next thing is how all this is too much for me. I don't want to do all this stuff. That's when I think the CoPilot comes very handy. So if you have CoPilot, it's kind of available pretty much with every Edge browser nowadays, the latest one. And if you use, I think this is my favorite thing, is if you could go and use the notebook option on the top. So if I go back here and I just copy my prompt from here, and let me just go here and paste this, if it lets me. Okay, let me just edit. Probably that bit works. Okay, so let me remove this for now, and I start executing it. And based on your internet connection, it would nicely explains what I'm saying here is, okay, this is my CSV file URL. This is where I have headers for this CSV files. Can you give me a code to, like, complete code, give me proper headers, and, like, above URLs, if there is anything, please trim my data as well, and convert the column data types properly, and all those things. So it is nicely giving me the code. I wouldn't say just copy and paste that code, but it is giving me nice explanation, and most of the times it actually gives a pretty nice code. I could also say, don't give me any explanation, just give me code, and it gives me that as well. This way, I could quite easily start learning, like, how to do these things. It's not only that, there are many times, I've even said it in my team as well, you could do the same thing in Power Query, copy the query, and paste it here, ask it to, can you convert this to Python? It gives you the Python code. Use that in the notebook and start execute by code by cell by cell. Then it gives you, like, work with the sample data to begin with, and then import all the data. So you don't have, you no longer have to import the entire data like we did in the Power Query. You could just work with the just some sample data and go back to that one. So you could nicely use CoPilot to do those things. And it is not only, like, that single bit, but, like, I could go and ask other things, like, okay, can you plot my data based upon the distributions and things? So in this case, what I am doing is I'm just using the Vega Fusion, another library, and this whole thing is nicely plotted for me to understand how my data is. I could go and click on Open VS Code, and now it opens the entire code in the Visual Studio. So if I want, I don't have to use the web interface only. I could use in the VS Code. And again, if you have GitHub Copilot, here I could go and just type, okay, help me to get, now I'm just making it up, honestly. And I have a GitHub Copilot. It creates the code for me by using the GitHub Copilot. So I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems, but it helps me to learn the language pretty nicely. So the last thing I want to cover is one last thing I want to cover is, can I take questions a bit later? Sorry, we are running on the time. Is the semantic link. So semantic link is the most amazing thing that's only available in Microsoft Fabric at the moment. So what semantic link is, it gives you a connection to our semantic model that we created in the Power BI. So when I say semantic model, it gives you connection to your semantic model data, the schema, the DAX, the measures that we created, and everything. So what we are doing here is I'm installing semantic link as a library, and then I'm installing a few other libraries that I need. And literally 10 lines of code, I could get all the workspaces that's available in my tenant, all the data sets that's available in my tenant, all the tables underneath those data sets, what is the description and the types and everything for each of them. And I could go and, what I could do is I could also even go and create relationship diagrams and all those things as well. So if I go and click on this for a sec. So what this is showing me is let me show the output. In here, the diagram view that we have in the Power BI desktop, I could just quickly get that one here. I could view all the relationships that's happening in my semantic model in my notebook. This used to be a full-blown project to be able to do that one. You have to deal with paging, authentication, all that stuff, just a few blocks of code, and it's available. The entire documentation is done in one notebook, and there you go, it's done. So, but what else you could do? Here, what I'm doing is, I'm getting my data set, my tables and everything, and what I'm also doing is, I am actually using a measure that's already available in my semantic model. And I'm creating, the things I do in my visual, I am actually doing that one as a few statements over here. I'm using the visual and some of the dimensions in one, and this is the data frame I got. Once I have my data frame, this is where, I could go and I could do other things. Okay, in here, what I'm using is, I'm using a plot to show how it is over the years. So I don't have to create a full-blown Power BI report when my end user wants this one visual. I could put that visual into a file and send it to the visual because that is the only thing that they wanted. I don't have to create the whole thing. But what else I could do is, like, imagine at the moment, we create the semantic model, we create the amazing Power BI visuals, but then a data scientist come in, they want the data. They want the data, but they also want that business logic that's been created in the semantic model. But now, because that measure that's available in the semantic model, I could just pull back into my notebook, and I'm using the data frame I just created. It has a few categories and the measure I created. So based on that data frame, with like, okay, now again I'm counting. Honestly, I don't understand the entire code here. I kind of developed this code with a combination of CoPilot and asking the questions and all those things. But what this is doing, I have two categories. I have a measure. What I have is the CO2 emissions for a region. Now what I am doing is, I am giving that data into ML model. It is training a model based on my measure definition that's available in my semantic model. It's training the model. It automatically, what it does is, if I go back to my notebook, my workspace, it also created an experiment for me in my workspace. I could go and I could click on the experiment, and I could see what else happening in that one. But by using one single notebook, I could also do the predictions of my data. Traditionally, what we had to do is we have to provide this data. If we are working with a really large data set, then we probably have to use the tabular editor, something else, get the data, keep it in a CSV file, go back to the data engineering team, run the pipeline, then they could take it to they could open a ML studio, start training. It was a long process, and in between, we have to get authorization from IT manager, project manager, this manager, that manager. Now what I need is to create one more cell in my notebook, and I could do the entire predictions if you know how to do it. So that is these are the various some of those things which were difficult. Just the simple things like working with the semantic link, being able to understand what are the various things that's available in your workspace, which was a difficult thing. You could just run 5 lines of code and you could do that. So basically, I'm going to go back to my slides now, if it lets me. So there are it is not, as I mentioned, it is not going to replace what we are doing. It is basically going to help us. So start with something, maybe start with semantic link. It helps us our documentation and things like that. Play with copying Power Query and changing that into Python. And there are so many things available within the notebook itself. I haven't showed you snippets option because it sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't, but there are snippets available as well in the notebooks. So there are very many low-code experiences as well to begin with. And then once we master it, we could go and understand the Spark UI, how the processing happening, how we could make sure it's performing the best, and all that stuff as well. So on that note, there are various resources. I will share the link to, that slides link is outdated. I created different slides link. I will share that one later. I'll probably put it on the LinkedIn or something with the content for the slides and the notebooks and everything. That slides link is not working anymore. But that's the feedback link. Please provide the feedback. I hope this encouraged you to understand notebooks a bit and make it easier to go and start exploring them. But if you have any questions, you have a question, you have 2 minutes. 1 minute.
You can download the code into VS Code, right?
Yeah.
Is there any way I can debug my code in VS Code and then push it back out?
So the question is, you could open the code in the VS Code. Is there any way I could debug the code and push it back, merge it back into the one? So I haven't showed it because considering the time. But yes, you could nicely, you could go and you could do the merging as well. And you could do all the debugging functionalities that you could basically do in here. So for example, if I just change something here, usually what it says is there is a merge option appears here. At the moment, it's not appearing yet, but when you're working with good connection, you would immediately see a merge option, and it's basically the usual code merge thing, and you could merge it to, it shows you a view from in the service, and shows a view yourself, and you could just merge. And you could also, all the time, there are multiple developers can work as well. So if you go here, so not share, I clicked on the wrong button here. So there is a co-editing option available as well, so you could others could co-edit too. Sometimes it just shows myself because I opened it in VS Code and myself and in the service, so it just shows like that as well. And yes, you can do the debugging and everything as well. One problem that I do face here is the Spark creation. Because in the service, the entire Spark creation is happening behind the screen. So it's already created for me. But in VS Code, the kernel that I am using is there are various kernels that you could use. So when you install the VS Code app, it automatically does this Fabric kernel stuff. But it doesn't, at least for me, maybe I'm wrong, it doesn't create the Spark session directly for me like it does in the service. So I have to run a bit of code to create the Spark session and then do it. So it's a bit beyond my understanding of Spark, to be honest. So how I use it, I use this to use the GitHub Copilot. And I copy the code and paste. I just merge it and execute it in the service than executing it here, because I'm just too lazy to figure it out. But there you go. We are on time. I'm going to be here if you have any questions, but I'm over here everywhere as well. And enjoy SQL Bits. Thank you.